All right. We all saw the Super Bowl. I think a lot of the stuff that people have been talking about most, maybe notably me, was pretty much exemplified in the Super Bowl. So, but there's still some holdouts and maybe still some uncertainty. So I put together a study of Patrick Mahomes from 2022 to 2024 and Tua from 2022 and 2024 to show some clear correlations. I had Odaris DeHady, who's a D1 cornerback, kind of agreed with some of my assessments early in the season, how KC has moved, not a lot, but a solid amount of their principles, their offensive principles, to match the Dolphins. And there's a reason for that. And so I'm going to track these 3 years, showing you what was in each season, a series of stats to create an analytics box to show you which was the best of these three seasons. And you're going to see a clear trend line. This is not about saying Tua is as good as Mahomes or if Tua had the offensive line. It's not about that. It's not about Tua or Mahomes as much as it is about football principles, clear football principles that I've been talking about. So I spent a lot of time on this huge graphic. I'm doing nothing else but focusing on this. So that's going to be the whole deal. I'm going to go on vacation in a couple of days, guys. So I'll have some podcasts coming out. I might not get your comments as quickly until I get back. I need a little break. Also, guys, subscribes, comments, and views. All that stuff keeps me in the biz. So I appreciate if you are already doing that. But if not, help old Curtis out. Subscribe, comment. I love the comments. And if you are subscribed, please hit the notification bell. So here, I'm going to go through the offensive line of Mahomes. You can see something clear. We already know two is. I'm not going to get into that. But this is a huge graphic. I'm going to dig into it. So you can see it right here. You're going to see passing pressure, concepts, production on both sides. I cut some of the stuff out for Tua because, like completions, because he's been injured so much. You can't really get a good gist of that. I left the touchdowns and interceptions in because it will show something loosely. But I kept drop back percentage, dropbacks, attempts, completions, completion percentage, time to throw, yards per attempt, touchdowns, interceptions, sacks, and then the concepts of play action and screens. And when I pull the screens and play actions together, I call it something called pass rush mitigation. Play actions and screens are designed to get the quarterback a little more time to keep them a little bit freer from pressure. And the more those things rise, the more the OC is dialing this stuff up to offset the pressure. Savvy? So I'm going to start in 2022 for Mahomes. The boxes in purple are the best of that's 3-year sample size. Green is the middle road, and red is the worst. So if you look at Patrick Mahomes, his drop back percentage, he was kept clean, middle road of those 3 years. He was under pressure, middle road of those 3 years. It's the not blitzed, I'm flipping. So it was almost 30% he was blitzed. And you want to be blitzed as a quarterback. So he was the most blitzed, still kept clean a solid amount of time, and under pressure a solid amount of time, but not the worst. But it was the highest blitz percentage that dropped precipitously. Dropbacks, highest attempts, highest completions, middle of the road completion percentage, and there's a reason for that. Time to throw, it was the longest. You want more time in the pocket. Allows receivers to get open and slows down the game for you, allows you to make better reads. You don't like to be rushed in football. Yards per attempt, 8. That was by far the best of the 3 years. Touchdowns, that was a magnificent year, 48 touchdowns. The least interceptions of 12. And he was only sacked 29 times, which was the best. Now, they ran the most play action, you can see over here in the concepts, and they threw the least amount of screens. So they try to offset the pressure by calling play actions. Not terribly high, like you'll see with Tua in 1 year, but still it was the highest. But understand, they were throwing a ton. they were looking deep and getting deep, and look at all those touchdowns. So you had to offset it a little bit, but they didn't really rely on the screens. But you can see this is obviously his best season in protection, in production, a little middle of the road stuff, but you could dig into that a little bit more if you want, but I'm not going to. So then in 2023, you can see he had his worst kept clean, his worst under pressure, and not blitzed was middle of the road. So what happened? Orlando Brown moved out. And this offensive line still did pretty good, but the loss of Orlando Brown was a little bit of a problem. So you could see here, they threw the most, 11 more pass plays than the year before, but the attempts were less. Dropbacks is the reason. Dropbacks means, sometimes you get a penalty and stuff like that. So whatever. But they try to throw the most that year. Completions dropped just one, so they're still getting the ball out. Completion percentage was the highest of those 3 years. Time to throw was equal to the year before, but the yards per attempt dropped a full yard. They started to get a little conservative, and not super conservative, but they were getting less clean time and under pressure a lot more. TDs dropped by 15, interceptions went up by 2, and sacks were 32, so that went up. But you can see over here, they drop the play action. They try to be very aggressive, but Mahomes uses super talent to kind of keep it going, but he was under duress. And some of the stuff, the production, the efficiency started dropping. But then they raised their screens to 14.8 to offset this. I've talked about how screens are designed to offset pressure. So you can see the unit, the blocking unit took a step down. Mahomes had a good season, but it was started to get a little bit of a struggle. But they still won. Great defense, run game, but he's also the great Mahomes. But you can see they're trying to offset this pressure in a lot of ways, but they're still trying to be aggressive. But when you go into 24, you'll see kept clean was the highest. Under pressure was the best of the 3 seasons. Not blitzed, the worst of those 3 seasons. So they're not getting blitzed, and is part of a reason for that. And I'm going to go into it. Dropbacks dropped. Attempts dropped dramatically, almost 100. Completions dropped about 50. Completion percentage went down to 73.7, which was the lowest. And time to throw dropped to the lowest at 2.31. But look at the yards per attempt. It dropped a little bit more. Touchdowns went a little bit more. Interceptions were, in the middle row. But when you factor in, he threw a lot less. He threw a lot more interceptions through the ratio. But look at those sacks, 47. And then look at the pass concepts, 25.2. They dialed up high on the play actions. The screens were in the middle. This was the most pass rush mitigation that they've had in all 3 seasons. And they did that. They shortened up the drops, lowered the game, sped up the throws, limited the number of throws, and then try to protect them more. Why? Because they drew off Sue Mateo. He didn't pan out. Tail on the right side continued to struggle. The refs didn't give him as much leeway this year. People were figuring it out. And you could see that KC, the trend line is clearly down as far as production, pressure, speed of throw, and up for pass rush mitigation. But if you look at this flow chart here, or make it a flow chart in your head, but you look at this layout, you're going to see the same thing happen to Tua. So here's Tua's graphic. Kept clean was the worst of the 3 years. Under pressure, the worst of the 3 years. But not blitzed was the highest. So he had the pressure. He wasn't kept clean as much. But the blitz came in. He was able to take advantage of it and get big plays. Completion percentage was the lowest of the 3 years. But look at 8.9 yards per attempt and 25 touchdowns in a shortened season. If he had been healthy, this would have been an unbelievable season. But there was there was pressure to it. But they understood that, and they let the pressure develop so they could attack deep. Look at the time to throw, 2.32, matched almost Mahomes. And sacks, 21. It was the middle of the road, but it was a shortened season. It was better than what you'll see in some regards to this season, not so much in 23. They had sort of a healthy line, not super healthy, but healthy of the 3 years. But look at the play action, 43.1% with only 5% screens. But that's almost 50% pass rush mitigation, about 49%. That's a lot of protection from calls and game planning to help Tua out, but he still was attacking deep. Still had time to throw in the pocket. Some of this was the cheat motion kept catching teams off guard. But this clearly was the best season. But look at the time to throw and look at the depth of target. Obviously, he got knocked around a little bit and he was out a couple of games, a bunch of games. So there was a negative to it where Mahomes hasn't missed any. And so if you want to knock Tua and you want to boast from Mahomes, there's a lot to boast Mahomes. He can take the hits. He's a bigger guy. And so the following year, they wanted to keep him healthy. They realized, well, the offensive line is what it is, but the tells and how they called and what they did shows you that they understood what this offensive line really was differently than what they were telling us. Obviously, also to keep Tua healthy in a critical season. You see here, kept clean, was middle of the road. Completion percentage was the best of the 3 seasons. You can see here, though, almost a full yard drop in yards per attempt. Touchdowns, he had 30, but it was a full season compared to 25, so it was a downward trend. But look at the time to throw, 2.32 to 2.09. Look at the difference between Mahomes. He was 2.35, and they dropped to 0.04 seconds just to get a little help. This was a dramatic drop that said something different. He was able to throw a 2.32. It's not that he wants to throw short. He can throw longer, and that's how he had the bigger game. But they clearly said, we're dropping this down. Sacks, 31, worst of his career. Didn't get injured. But that's a full season. And it's still around sort of the first 2 years of Mahomes. So they were able to navigate. But look over here, the concepts, they dropped the play action to 29.6, almost like 13%, but then the screens rose 10%. So overall, they had 45 pass rush mitigation, which was the same pretty much as the year before. They just switched the flavor, try to get more guys in route so Tua could find guys. And he did on occasion, but as the season progressed, as I've talked before, they dropped the leverage more, moved the edges out, and played deeper, and that limited some stuff. But you can see the screens got bumped up when the play actions dropped because it offsets pressure. Then you go into this season, kept clean was the highest, 77, under pressure the least, 23, but not blitzed the worst. But then you go to his completion percentage, despite being kept clean, despite having the least amount of pressure, he wasn't blitzed, and the completion percentage was middle of the road. But look at the yards per attempt. They dropped almost another full yard. It's almost 3 yards from 2022. Touchdowns were 19. He missed some games. Interceptions I'm not even going to talk about. Time to throw, though, dropped even more, 0.05 seconds. But look at Mahomes. He dropped 0.4 seconds to get some leeway. That's what Reed dialed up. We dropped another 0.5. That is 0.28 clean time to throw from 2022. And sacks, 21. It was a shortened season. It would have been more probably than 23. Maybe comparable, but not really. Maybe, I don't know. With 22, just put it in there. It's hard to gauge. But then the concepts, play actions kind of dropped a little bit, but still pretty high. It was higher than even the highest of Mahomes. But then the screens went up another 5% to 20. So still at 45% pass rush mitigation. The highest Mahomes ever had was 36, 37%. And when you're running play actions, you're keeping guys out of routes. So they try to put a little more guys in routes. But when you run screens and they're not buying what you're selling, they're not blitzing, and they're not worried about the inside run game, it's hard to get these things off. We could get it off because of speed, but you could see that everything as far as aggressiveness, just like Mahomes, continued to drop. But then the pass rush mitigation, it did drop a little bit, but still very high. But then all the numbers dropped, the speed of throw. All these things are signs that the OC is not trusting their protection. They're not trusting enough, so they've got to get more and more conservative. And if Mahomes, the great Mahomes, you can go to the Super Bowl and see how it played out for him. I can go through those numbers, but I'm not going to. Even Mahomes suffers from a poor O-line, and it wasn't just the game. They got to the Super Bowl. A lot of that was the defense. A lot of that was some help from the friends of the Zebras. A lot of that was just really clutch play, but they struggled to get there and then ran out of steam when they faced a truly talented team. But the whole concept of the offense was made more conservative to reel things in because they didn't trust what they have. Maybe a little receiver, but Worthy's a burner. But it really is about the offensive line. From the second postseason game on, they had Thuney at left tackle, and then they had the undrafted rookie at left guard, and then Taylor kind of been struggling more and more as people understood what he's about. But these are very parallel. And yes, Tua is a much lower quarterback than Mahomes. But you can see just as McDaniel dialed up quicker throws, pass rush mitigation, shorter throws, working the edges, Andy Reid did the same thing with the great Mahomes. And it's not because both these quarterbacks are descending, although you might want to say that about Tua. It's about the offensive line. So I hope you enjoyed this. There's a lot more to pull out of this, but we won't get into that now. Curtis saying, be well, go Fins. Curtis out. Start building your own online sportsbook today by getting signed up with aceperhead.com service that'll allow you to book action on sports from all around the world.